Hey everyone, it's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider. Glad you are joining us. And for the first time in about 6 weeks, we are finally going to be talking about a Bengals win, if you can believe it. And it was a very good one against the Philadelphia Eagles. We are very excited to finally be on the air and talking about something so positive with this team after so many things have seemed to go against them. Again, glad to have you with us, and thanks for the support you have shown this show. We are on episode number 19. We're almost in episode 20, if you can believe it. I'm joined by my co-hosts, as usual, Connor Howe and Scott Schulte. Scott, how are you on the Eastern Standard Time?
Doing very well. Yesterday was the feast day of St. Nicholas, so we do our tradition in our household is to do gifts. So like in the gifts in your stockings. So
Oh, nice. Okay.
like a little pre-Christmas thing. So that was
Very
kind of
cool.
cool. It was very exciting watching our son open. It's cool getting your own gifts, but when you have a 3-year-old, it's kind of more exciting to watch them get their gifts.
Of
So,
course.
so that was a very good. So had a very good feast day of St. Nicholas this week.
That's awesome. Scott, the traditionalist Schulte. I love it. I love it. Connor, how are you? The
I'm
Bengals won, like I said, so you got to be feeling at least pretty good for this week.
yeah. I mean, not a lot of Twitter wars this week, which was really nice. You get the occasional people saying we should tank. This is terrible. It's actually pretty surprising to substantiate how there's a significant portion of Bengal fans who I think would have rather seen the team lose than even try to get a shutout. I mean, and that's okay. People are entitled to their own opinions, but when it's nice to see the players happy and excited, I saw that they were all celebrating Dome Top birthday that night after the game, and so it was cool to see. And Drake Kirkpatrick had some fans hat. He traded hats with a fan and had some Tiger hat on after the game, and just kind of messing around. It was good to see that the players were actually excited. I guess for it, they seemed like they had been so frustrated, and so it's nice to see that they're finally just having at least one feeling of hope and happiness, I guess.
Right. And there's a post again. If you watch this show or listen to this show, it is available on SB Nation's Cincy Jungle website. And one of the posts I put up in post game analysis, there was a picture of Vontez Burfict and Adam Jones walking off the field. Their pads were off after the win, and they had grins from ear to ear. And that was good to see after so many negative things have affected this team over the past handful of weeks. That being said, we're going to do a quick recap of this game. Then we've got a couple of interesting topics to get to, one of which ties into a fan question we received this week. And again, if you want to fire those away, you can. We're live on YouTube on Wednesday nights, so you can join us in the chat there and shoot us some fan questions. Where you can also get the show in a variety of different manners. SoundCloud, again, YouTube, as I mentioned. We're on iTunes. It's on Cincy Jungle. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, and you can email us the obinsider@gmail.com. So we encourage you to get in touch with us. Let us know what you want to hear on this show, and what we're doing right, and maybe not so much what we're doing wrong. But if you want to pat us in the back, we like that. So Scott, I'll start with you. Quick recap of the game. The Bengals won 32-14. A lot to like this week, especially given that those 14 points were kind of garbage touchdowns, if you will, by the Eagles. Very good way to bounce back after so many losses and a tie the past handful of weeks. So what was the one thing that really stood out to you that you could really put a feather in your cap, if you will, and say, that was really good by the Bengals this week?
Well, as you said, since I'm a traditionalist, I probably would have a feather in my cap. Kind of the old school
Fedora or something, right?
Which unfortunately I don't have on me. I'll have to go grab that out of the wardrobe. Anyway,
Please do.
The one thing I did like is kind of the total opposite of tradition. It's, well, as far as Marvin Lewis tradition, it's seeing the young guys play. I mean, that was something I thought was awesome. I know part of it is injury. I don't know if part of it is because he's like, hey, let's just give him a chance, or what it was. But it was awesome seeing Cody Core out there. He had 30 snaps and had a couple catches. I think he actually had more receiving snaps than James Wright and Erickson, maybe combined. So that was really cool, because I remember when they drafted him, they were saying, hey, we like this guy as much as Daquan Treadwell, who went, the first round right before they picked. William Jackson III. So it was really nice seeing him out there get a couple catches, and then Deshaun Williams. I was very happy. I was wondering if they were ever going to activate him, because a lot of people have heard the story last year how he passed up a chance to leave the Bengals and become a active roster player for another team. I think it was maybe the Saints.
Yep, it was the Saints.
On that. To stay with the Bengals, and it paid off. He got to play. I thought he looked pretty solid, and I mean, for an undrafted guy to be out there and get his first NFL snap. So that'd be my one takeaway. It was really awesome seeing on offense and defense, the Bengals playing some of the younger kind of unheralded guys, a late draft pick and a undrafted guy, and they held their own. I mean, Core had that big catch, and they just looked like they belonged. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's a great point. And Cody Core, I mean, obviously he's been pressed into action because AJ Green has been sidelined with his hamstring injury he suffered against the Bills. So yeah, I totally agree. The new faces, whether it was Josh Shaw, who's not necessarily a new face, he was out there quite often. Denard got some time, and there are guys out there that are on the younger end of the roster that got some time and made some plays, and it was great to see. Connor, one or two positive takeaways from you in the Bengals 32-14 win against the Eagles.
Yeah, I think on Scott's same point, just for a second. Also we saw Fedgelin play his first defensive snaps of the year. I think that was more so due to injury with the safety backfield, but he'd played a lot of special teams, but hadn't played a single snap on defense, I believe, and he was playing more. And it's interesting because the Bengals had been playing a lot of young guys throughout the season. Nick Vigil had been getting snaps and obvious passing downs. We've seen Darqueze Dennard and Josh Shaw play in the slot, and obviously Tyler Boyd has come into his own. I think for me, the biggest thing was the fact that the Bengals receiving options stepped up in the passing game. Even when Tyler Eifert hasn't really been that consistent, he's had a catch here or there, and usually one of them will go for a touchdown. But Brandon LaFell had another big game. He's had a few really nice games this year. I think he's earned himself a second contract. I don't know for how long or for how much, but fans are people are going to be cynical. People are going to say, Tyler Boyd can't separate. There's no chance he's ever going to be able to separate in the NFL. People are going to say Brandon LaFell is a limited receiver. But at the end of the day, they're producing it. And granted, it wasn't a perfect secondary. And people are going to say the Eagles' secondary was really bad. But the Eagles had a strong front seven, and they have a really quality safety tandem in Rodney McLeod and Malcolm Jenkins. Malcolm Jenkins is one of the most versatile defensive backs in the NFL. And so, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But to see the Dalton supporting cast step up, and obviously Dalton had the best game of his entire season, perhaps the best two, maybe his best game of his career, or a top 2 or 3 game of his career. He had a really, really good game. He was all on point the entire time. And the offensive line wasn't terrible, but Dalton, I mean, he was just making plays. He was escaping the pocket when the offensive line collapsed. There's a couple of things, obviously, that the team can improve on, but to see Dalton and his supporting cast show so much chemistry against a team that isn't that terrible when it comes to defense at the very least, it was good to see. And obviously, I mean, Cody Core was really fun to watch. Alex Erickson with a couple snaps here and there. It's a promising group, and I think that the main takeaway from that is that a lot of fans think the Bengals are going to need this wide receiver too. But if you're Cincinnati, you have to feel good about who you have right now with Green, Tyler Boyd, potentially LaFell next year, and then you have a couple of guys who could potentially make a play here or there, and James Wright, Cody Core, and maybe even Alex Erickson.
Again, all valid points by both you guys, and the playing of young players this late in the season when the Bengals record isn't so great will point to, it'll segue nicely into our next segment. But just to kind of put a bow on the Eagles game, I definitely agree with what both of you guys said about what impressed you in this game. But for me, I just liked that the ball was kind of bouncing their way. And it's been a year of officiating that hasn't gone their way. Turnovers haven't necessarily gone their way. And though the Bengals did drop, I think, another 2 or 3 interceptions on the afternoon, they still got 3 off of Carson Wentz. And, George Aloka was kind of bobbling it, and things were going so well for the Bengals. He was bobbling it to the ground, and it just kind of lifted right up into Deshaun Williams' hands. And he got credit for the interception, even though Aloka kind of was on the coverage there. And it was just indicative of the day that things were going the Bengals' way. And, Andy Dalton had a fantastic game. To your point, Connor, there were a couple of contested throws that could have been batted away or,
he threw
maybe
what should have been an easy pick also,
Yep,
I believe.
Yep. And there were some that were either dropped by the defenders or somehow, some way he fit it into this window or the receivers made a play on some of these catches to really help him out and help out his already good day. So it was just nice to see that the ball was bouncing their way, if you will. That's one of the things that was so key to the Bengals winning 12 games last year. It's not necessarily, I mean, you get lucky when you're good, I guess. And whatever the case may be, the Bengals got their fourth win of the season. They are 4-7-1. And, it's not a great record, but, they're still fighting as indicative as to what they did on Sunday against the Eagles at home at Paul Brown Stadium. So that being said, the Bengals, as I mentioned, are 4-7-1, and theoretically, they still have a pulse for the playoffs. Part of the reason for that is because the AFC North division is a bit weak. The Ravens and the Steelers have been gaining a bit of ground on the Bengals over the past couple of weeks, especially with the Ravens beating the Bengals. But with the Bengals getting a win against the Eagles, that helps. Technically, I saw something, I believe it was on Fox Sports, in terms of, division and if the things ended today. And I believe the Bengals they're like 13th in the pecking order in the AFC, but they still technically record-wise are quote unquote in the hunt. So there are two schools of thought with the Bengals winning on Sunday and getting a win. Obviously, with things not going so well prior to last week, there's a contingency of fans that want to see the team kind of tank, get high picks next year, and kind of reload an already stacked roster and really maybe there's a coaching change, all of that stuff, and then they really make a push again in 2017 with those high picks. Some still want to see this team fight and maybe win out if possible. And if for some reason the Ravens and the Steelers stumble, a very, very slight possibility the Bengals could win the AFC North, which seems to be their only way into the playoffs at this point, given the strength of the AFC West. But the Bengals have games against the Steelers and the Ravens. So all of that being said, Scott, there's kind of the tanking. Are you pro tank the season and get the high pick at this point? Or do you want them to still try and either win out or win a lot of games, which also, what plays into this, could save Marvin Lewis's job, given that, they're still fighting for the coach type of thing?
I would assume, well, based on what we talked about last week, I think Lewis is probably safe regardless.
Right.
Even if they lose out, I think he's probably safe. Just knowing him, I don't know him, but based on our perception of what we see from him, what we see from Mike Brown, that seems to be what will probably happen. But kind of beyond that, looking at, do they have a realistic shot? If you go back to 2002, which is the first year the NFL changed the league where you have 4 divisions of 4 teams, and then you have the division winners, the 2 wildcard teams make the playoffs. So the modern playoff era goes back to 2002. Since that, teams who have only had 8 wins, which is what the Bengals would have if they win out. So you beat Philly, you win your next 4 games, you finish off 5-0. Best they can do is 8-7-1. Would that get them in the playoffs? Historically, since 2002, 8 teams have made the playoffs with only 8 wins. So it is possible. So it's, once every other year that happens. So you look at this year, could the Bengals do it? As you mentioned, the wild card, probably not going to happen that route. The AFC West already has 2 teams with 9 or more wins. So their only chance is passing the Broncos, who have 8 wins. The Broncos have the tiebreaker on them.
Yep.
Odds are they're going to win one of the next 4 games. So, yeah, that's probably not happening. So, as you said, it goes to the AFC North. For them to win the AFC North, both Baltimore and Pittsburgh have to do no better than 1-3. And so they both play Cincinnati. So if you assume Cincinnati wins out, obviously they both lose that game. Baltimore, I think they can pass because they still have to go to New England this week, which is probably a loss. They have to go to Pittsburgh, who I think Pittsburgh's a better team. I think Pittsburgh probably wins that game. You never know. So let's say and then we're saying, okay, they're going to lose at Cincinnati because obviously, if the Bengals win out. So they could, in theory, actually pass Baltimore. Then the question becomes, okay, are they going to pass Pittsburgh? If we assume Pittsburgh loses at Cincinnati, which has to happen for them to win out, Pittsburgh still has that game at Baltimore at home, which I said they're probably win. Even if they don't, they still go to Buffalo, who's a beatable team, I think, for them. And then you have their last game of the year. They host the Cleveland Browns. Hapless, winless Cleveland Browns. One thing that Pittsburgh does really well is they win the games they have to win. You go into Week 17, you tell Pittsburgh you have to win this game to get in. They're probably going to win that game. So, I guess based on everything I see, I think we could pass Baltimore. I just don't think we're going to be able to pass Pittsburgh. I'm assuming Pittsburgh probably wins 2 of those 4 games, worst case. So they, end up 9-7. Best we'd do is 8-6 or 8-7-1. So we'd miss the playoffs. So then that takes you to the next question you mentioned. Okay, if we aren't going to make the playoffs, should we even be trying to win? Should we just, pack it in? Let's throw in all the rookies. Let's, kind of play for next year, play for a high pick. And so I got thinking about that today and actually looked at the last few years. And right now the Bengals are probably going to pick somewhere between the 5th through 10th round picks in the first round. If they don't win, they, let's say they lose the next 3-4 games. If they drafted right now today, they're probably the 5th pick, 6th pick. Let's say they win these games, make this nice valiant effort, just don't get there. Okay, now you're looking 10th pick, something like that. So what is the difference between what you would get in the 5th pick versus what you would get in the 10th pick? This year, that's the difference between Jalen Ramsey and Eli Apple. Most people say that'd be a downgrade. You obviously want Jalen Ramsey. A lot of people consider him the top defensive back in the draft. The year before that, picking at number 5 would get you a guy like Vic Beasley, who has 10.5 sacks this year, or Leonard Williams, guys who wouldn't have been there, pick 10. 2014, Khalil Mack. He has 29, 30 sacks last 2.5 years.
Yeah. Yep.
The year before that, it's Ezekiel Ansah over Barkevious Mingo. Go back to 2011, you have a chance at Patrick Peterson, Tyron Smith, Julio Jones. The year before that, Eric Berry's sitting there. And you go back to 2008, the Bengals start out 4-8. Same situation we're in right now. They played themselves out of the playoffs. They go win 3 of their last 4 games. Don't make the playoffs. They make, kind of a Marvin Lewis-esque kind of, we're out of it. Now we'll start winning kind of a season. And as you may remember, because of how they finished, they ended up grabbing Keith Rivers and kind of put themselves out of getting, potentially a better player. So based on all that, since I'm saying they probably aren't going to win the AFC, I don't think Pittsburgh's going to lose enough for them to pass them. I do think they can get a better player in the 5th pick as they would in the 10th pick. It'd be nice to see them on draft day, have a chance at that better player. But that being said, I don't think you just go out there and outright tank, because I don't think it's like basketball where that one guy is going to entirely change your team. So I'd love to, since we know they're not in it, if they lose games, I'm not going to complain, because I think for the future it's the best thing, but I'm not going to go out there and root for them to lose, because and you have to assume they draft the right guy anyway. I mean,
Yep.
you could have some studs sitting there. Let's say you lose your games and you have a stud sitting there at 5, and you pull a Cleveland Browns and you draft like a Justin Gilbert or Johnny Manziel kind of pick.
Yep. Great stuff, Scott. That's fantastic research and everything there. I have so many thoughts that are, as you were putting that stuff out there, I'm like, I got a thought on that. I've got a thought on that. Obviously, the Keith Rivers thing, that was in response to that 2007 year where they finished, I believe, 7-9. Then they took Rivers in 08. And if you remember, they stayed, and this is what frustrates me and a lot of other fans with this team, especially in the draft, is they stay put. We talked about this before on this show. They rarely ever move up, and when they do, it's for players that are low impact players or players that are not deserving to be moved up for. And if you remember that year, that was the year that the Saints leapfrogged them to get Cedric Ellis, the player that they wanted at defensive tackle.
Yeah.
Another USC player, by the way. And they leapfrogged him
too.
What's that?
Right after. I think the Saints jumped up right 2 picks before them, and then
Yep.
Jacksonville jumped up the pick right after that.
Yep. And so this is and why I bring that up is because this is why it's so difficult for me personally to sit here and go, well, should they tank or shouldn't they? If they tank, then they don't really need to move up and get these high impact players, which sometimes they pass on because they sit there and they say, well, let's get a talented guy that falls to us that other teams have passed on or other teams have leapfrogged them to get higher impact guys. So that's why I'm kind of like, I don't want them to tank, but if they're not going to make the playoffs, you want them to have as high of a pick as possible, right? I mean, you want them to. I mean, that's why this is such a hard argument. The other thing I want to bring up, you mentioned the games, and Connor, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. With all of the offseason attrition this team has experienced with coaches and free agency and all of that stuff, this seemed like if there was a year for the Bengals to take advantage of a weak AFC North, this was the year. And I have not been impressed with Pittsburgh. I have not been impressed with Baltimore. Even though both teams have beaten the Bengals, I felt that the Bengals had every opportunity, had they played just a little bit more sound football, to win those games, and they did not come out victorious on those. And I feel that having both Pittsburgh and Baltimore at home seems to be very winnable based on what I've seen from the Ravens and Steelers this year. So it's just a shame that the Bengals haven't taken care of a little bit more business this year, because this seems like such a winnable division. And like you said, Scott, you might be able to win this with nine wins. Again, maybe 8 wins if you're the Bengals, if they're able to do that. Connor, your thoughts on tank or not, fight till the end? Get the draft position. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, and I think both of you make good points. That being said, I think a lot of Bengal fans are very, very into the fact that if you have a higher draft pick, you're going to get the better player. And that's not, you're going to have I think what you need to distinguish is that it's going to give you the opportunity to get a better player. And sure, I mean, some of the high draft picks have turned out to be great players. Last time, people are very quick to say the last time the Bengals had a first round pick, they picked a top 5 pick, they picked AJ Green. They also failed to mention that the last time they had a top 10 pick before that, they picked Andre Smith. A lot of their first and most of their very big busts. The Bengals are the team that has drafted one of the most, or have drafted some of the greatest quantity of busts probably of any NFL team in the first round of the NFL draft. So I think more so than, I'll talk about tanking in a bit, but I think you just need to hit your picks. And I think that, sure, being a couple picks higher might give you a better chance, but is it really going to make your chances that much better? And I'm going to point to a team I pointed to a couple weeks ago as an example, the Cowboys. So last year, the Cowboys obviously had a bad year. They lucked out and got Ezekiel Elliott with the 4th pick. The year before, 2015, they had the 27th pick in the NFL draft, and they took Byron Jones, who was kind of an interesting pick there. People didn't really know what to make of him, but he's really blossomed into probably the most versatile defensive back in the NFL. If you listen to Andy Benoit, who's from the MMQB, he, before the season, had been touting Jones as one of the most interesting corners in the NFL because he said that Jones is one of the only defensive backs in the NFL who can pretty much shadow Gronk, while at the same time he's a very talented safety. He can play pretty much any position in the secondary. The year before, they have the 16th pick. They pick Zach Martin, who's coincidentally, I don't know, one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, probably a top 2 guard, a consensus top 2 guard, I'll say. The year before, they have the 31st overall pick, and they pick Travis Frederick, who's by far the best center in the NFL, probably, or at the very least, the best by a slim margin. The year before, they had a number 6 overall pick. They pick Morris Claiborne, who really has had a very unimpressive career up until this point, where this year he's really been coming into his own. 2011, they have the 9th pick. As everyone remembers, 2011 was that loaded class with almost every single pick in the first round hit. And they grabbed Tyron Smith, who's turned into one of the best tackles in the league with the 9th pick. Year before, they picked 2010, the 24th overall pick, they picked Dez Bryant. And so The Cowboys, basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they've picked all over the board, yet they've hit on all these picks. And the Bengals had been that team for a while. Like we've been saying for so many times in the recent episodes. They landed Geno Atkins in the fourth round. They landed Carlos Dunlap, I believe, in the second round. They got Iloka and Marvin Jones in the fifth. They got all these different playmakers, and it wasn't just the first round picks. I mean, the Bengals. People who are Bengal fans are a little bit hypocritical in the sense that they love to criticize the team's first round picks, but then at the same time they say that the team needs a high first round pick so they can get a better player. I mean, the team has drafted a lot of players in the first round and hasn't hit on those players, but drafting higher, I mean, yeah, Scott pointed out an interesting point that you can get it Khalil Mack as a top 5 pick. Okay, but 3 picks before the Rams picked Greg Robinson, who was pretty much behind Jadeveon Clowney, who also was kind of a miss before this year. Greg Robinson was kind of the consensus guy, and of course he's struggled throughout his entire time. Blake Bortles his mechanics have been terrible this year, and the Jaguars are a bad team for it. The Bills have Sammy Watkins, who can't stay on the field. That's 3 picks out of the top 5 who probably haven't been hits, maybe even 4. The year before that, you have Eric Fisher, Luke Jokel, Deion Jordan, Lane Johnson, and Ziggy Ansah. Of the 5, only Ziggy Ansah has been to the Pro Bowl, and even him this year, I believe he has 0 sacks this year, and Lane Johnson was suspended for 10 games. And then the pick after that, obviously, is Barkevius Mingo, Jonathan Cooper. So, I mean, it kind of depends on the draft class. Sometimes you can have a strong class, sometimes you can have a weak class. Even in 2012, you have Andrew Luck, obviously the first overall pick, but then you have RG3, Trent Richardson, Matt Khalil, Justin Blackman, Morris Claiborne, who I mentioned, Mark Barron, and Ryan behind. And following them, obviously, Luke Kuechly, Stephon Gilmore, Dontari Poe, Fletcher Cox, a lot better players. And then obviously 2011 loaded class, and we can go on. But I guess, like I said, the point I'm trying to bring up is that for the Bengals, the picks that they've made, if the best players on their team were all first round picks, top 5 picks, it would make sense. If Vontaze Burfict, Geno Atkins, AJ Green, Andy Dalton, every playmaker on the team was a top 5 pick, it would make sense. But for the Bengals, their biggest issue hasn't been not having a high draft pick, in my opinion. It's been not being able to develop those draft picks into the playmakers that you're hoping they'll become. Like we saw, Vontaze Burfict, an undrafted free agent, because of his character concerns or whatever it may be, and he blossoms into a guy who, I can't believe we weren't talking about this earlier, is probably one of the top 2 linebackers in the NFL at the inside linebacker position. And so for me, you look at the Bengals and you can go all over the board, but the one thing I'll say is that regardless of whatever happens, they're going to have a high quantity of picks in comparison to years past. And the last time they had a lot of picks was the 2012 draft, where they drafted Dre and Kevin Zeitler both in the first round. They had Devin Still, who probably didn't work out for them. They had Mohamed Sanu, who turned them into a compensatory pick and had some production here. Brandon Thompson, who's been up and down but hasn't been terrible. Orson Charles, who is some other team right now. Sean Prater, who I believe is out of the NFL. But then they had Marvin Jones and George Iloka in the 5th, and then Dan Herron in the 6th, who Dan Herron wasn't even that bad of a pick. He kind of had a good game against them in the playoffs when the Colts played them in 2014. So, I mean, yeah, moving up in the draft is going to give you the potential to have a better player. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have the first guy in your draft board. Now, the question is, and I'm not trying to say the Bengals aren't good at evaluating talent. I think they have the potential to be a good team at evaluating talent. They have been in the past. And, it's still, the jury's still out on the most 2 recent draft classes. But in tanking, you're not only sure you might get a good player. The Chargers didn't tank, but they got Joey Bosa with the 3rd overall pick. And the first 2 picks in the draft this year were I can't even remember, but generally for top 5 overall picks have been pretty consistent. Though there's been obviously the blatant miss every here and there with the Jamarcus Russells of the world, but tanking presents a big issue in the sense that you're basically giving up on the players, and I think there's a lot fans kind of overlook in the sense that there could be potentially very serious, significant morale issues if you choose to lose out. Players are humans after all, and we saw.
Well, right, but that's Connor. That goes back to the whole Marvin Lewis coaching thing too, right? I mean, doesn't that play into whether or not you want to keep Lewis and whether or not he's got a grasp on the players and all of that?
I think that. I mean, you're right there. I think, like we all said, I think we all, at least us 3, believe that Lewis is a guy who's probably going to keep his job, who
right. Yeah.
probably shouldn't have the job. But it's going to be up to him. It's Lewis ultimately. I think it's Lewis's decision whether he stays, and people are going to say that losing out is going to get Lewis fired. I don't think it will. I don't think any of us could legitimately believe
fair.
that, especially after Sunday when all the energy that came from that win, and it seems like Lewis had his players back, and we still have the talent, and so Mike Brown just might think, I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to say anyone's wrong. I guess it's just that players are people, and people are too quick to forget that you have a guy like Drake Kirkpatrick who has been playing very well this year, and they win on Sunday, and he looked so happy, and I really can't tell anyone whether or not he's going to stay in Cincinnati. But I think having those moments where he is feeling good after a win, having those moments where you see the team up and the players are happy and like satisfied and fulfilled is going to not only make the players like play to the level that they're capable of playing, but it's also just going to, I don't know, I think if you're a free agent and you look at Cincinnati and they intentionally tank, it's kind of hard to justify going to the Bengals. It's, even in the draft, I mean, we've seen guys like Eli Manning be like, oh, I don't want to go to San Diego, trade
Bosa.
and then
Bosa had an issue.
Yeah, Bosa, I mean, his was more the agent was kind
right.
of like overruling him, but it's a matter of morale, and that for me, it's just the draft is a crapshoot when it comes down to it, and even a top 5 pick can turn out to be a giant disaster, and so the Bengals, I'm excited because they have a lot of picks, and I think the Bengals have done pretty well when they've had a lot of picks. They have trading chips. They could trade McCarron if they want. They could even get more picks than they already have. And with those picks, they could trade up if they really want to. So I think it's going to look good regardless. They have the ammo to move up if they really like a guy. And I think if they're smart and they see a defensive end, which is I think their biggest need by far, and they think, okay, well he's going to get picked here. You move up, sacrifice the 4th or 5th round pick, whatever it takes. Grab that guy, even if it's a 3rd round pick. I don't care. Grab the guy. And hope that it works out for you. But, I mean, at the end of the day, the draft's a crapshoot. So it's hard for me to justify losing out just in the sense that people are people. And it's very easy for us to forget that, I guess.
But do we really want to trade up for a guy they're going to sit behind Wallace Gilberry?
Exactly. I mean, the Bengals are a very slow team to play those rookies. So how big of an impact is a high draft pick going to have on the immediate future, especially with Dalton and AJ Green, Geno Atkins, Vontaze Burfict? They're only going to be 29, 28, 27 years old for so long. That's another issue, I guess.
Mine, good stuff from both of you. My thing with it, and I'm going to be brief, there's conditions and variables to both. I mean, obviously, if the Bengals are going to win out and win the division, let's do that. I mean,
we're all on board.
I mean, so let's if that's going to happen, obviously you want to do that. But if you get if you're 6-8-1 or whatever, 6-9-1, whatever the case is, and you're 7-8-1, and then all of a sudden you kind of lose draft position, that stinks a bit. My only caveat supporting the other way, regardless of not tanking, is the Bengals have a quarterback, and whether or not you're the biggest Andy Dalton fan or not, if you're tanking, usually you need a viable quarterback, and you need to get up in that top 5, top 3, top 2 picks to get up there and
top 1 if you're the Browns.
Right, get that
pick for once.
Right, get the quarterback. The Bengals have a quarterback in Andy Dalton that has gotten them to the playoffs. He hasn't gotten them through the playoffs, but he's productive. He has had good seasons with the Bengals. If they needed a quarterback, that's the one reason I could say, you know what, tank the season, play the young guys, let them get the snaps, and really work to get that quarterback in the draft. Since they don't need one, I don't know if I support that.
Although that's one of the awesome things about having a high pick is that you look the last few years, those teams are so desperate up there.
Yep.
That they're reaching for those quarterbacks where you had Mariota and Winston go back to back, and then Goff and Wentz. That if you're sitting there, something like 3, 4, 5, and the people in front of you are taking a quarterback, even if the quarterback isn't worth the top 10 pick, they're grabbing them. So you're getting, probably the best or second best position guy. And that's an awesome position to be in, sitting there, 3rd, 4th, 5th, knowing, well, they need a quarterback. They're taking, Deshaun Watson. Oh, they need a quarterback. They're taking Kaiser from Notre Dame, or they're taking whatever. Like, oh my gosh, look at this. We have 3 elite players who are all falling to us. we kind of get, or at least we get one of them. We're picking 5th or 6th. We know we're getting one of those 3 guys because the Browns are desperate. They're going to grab a quarterback. Maybe, I don't know. This team's desperate.
I hope for their sake they do. They need a quarterback right now.
It's a great counter argument, Scott, because then you look at it again. If the Bengals tank and they get say they land the number 3 pick or the number 2 pick or whatever, they probably won't with 4 wins now. But say theoretically they did that and they don't need a quarterback, then a team that's behind them can give up the bank to move up to number 2, number 3, and they can even accumulate more picks and do some more draft maneuvering if Mike Brown and Marvin Lewis would actually ever do that. We are looking, obviously to the future here because this season does seem to be a little bit out of the Bengals' control, but they do still have a playoff pulse, believe it or not. Great stuff from both of you guys. Again, this is a hot topic about to tank or not to tank. That is the question, to quote Shakespeare's Hamlet there. What are your thoughts, listeners? Let us know. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can get all of our content through SoundCloud. You can subscribe there and download all of our content. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, get our videos there. You can get in touch with us on Twitter @BengalsOBI. And all of our stuff is also on Cincy Jungle. You can check that stuff out. And if I didn't mention already, we're on iTunes. You can leave a rating and comment and all of that. So please check us out in a variety of different ways. We are worldwide, and we appreciate the support. Before we get out of here with kind of previewing the upcoming matchup against the Browns, which, this year it's kind of like, oh boy, this is going back to 2001 or something. But before we do that, one quick topic I wanted to talk about. There's an arising issue with the Bengals at the tackles positions. And in this offseason, the Bengals made the deliberate decision to let Andre Smith walk in free agency because they invested their number 1 and number 2, their first and second round picks in Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher in the 2015 draft, obviously showing that they had plans for the future. Andrew Whitworth is now in his mid-30s. He was drafted in 2006, so he's been with the team for 11 this is his 11th season now. There's not really true wear and tear on him. He's been a very durable and a very, very probably a top 3 tackle ever to play for the Bengals, which is saying something given that one of them is in the Hall of Fame. But that being said, his play has dipped along with the rest of the offensive line. His play has dipped this year. Andrew Whitworth's has. And Cedric Ogbuehi was given the right tackle starting spot this year, and it's been a disaster. He has been benched. He's been rotated in with Eric Winston. Jake Fisher got some significant snaps last week at right tackle in relief of Ogbuehi against the Eagles. So there's now a lot of news that have come out this week, and I'll start with you, Connor. One piece of news is that Whitworth, and this is a breath of fresh air, even though he hasn't played to his Pro Bowl level that we've become accustomed to. Whitworth has made it known that he wants to return to the Bengals in 2017. And again, he will now be in his mid to late 30s at that point. I don't have his birthday in front of me, but I do know
right now. Okay,
he'll be in his mid 30s. He wants to return to be the team's left tackle in 2017. Now you have Paul Alexander, the Bengals offensive line coach, working out Cedric Ogbuehi not only at right tackle, but this week he's also been getting reps at left tackle with the hope that Ogbuehi will get snaps at left tackle and their viewing of him as a more natural left tackle. What do you think the Bengals should do? I mean, again, there's still a handful of games to be played this year. The Bengals are going to try and do what they can to get scrape together the division, as we just were talking about. But in the event that they cannot win the games they need to win, and it's really looking to 2017, what do the Bengals do on the offensive line? Do they keep Whitworth and do a Band-Aid type of situation with him still letting those Fisher and Abuehi groom? Or do they say, thanks for everything, Whit, appreciate it. If you want to go somewhere else,
Yeah, I
awesome.
mean, it was definitely something where I didn't think would be an issue before this year. I don't think most Bengal fans probably thought this would have been an issue because Whitworth always carries such a large cap hit, which is fine. He deserves the money, but the Bengals right now just they plan for Oblihi to be ready by now and for Jake Fisher to be ready by now, and right now we really don't know if either one is. I mean, you can't take PFF grades as gospel like we've always said, but Oblihi's been like one of the worst in the NFL in terms of Pro Football Focus grades, and Jake Fisher has been barely above that. So they're pretty much, you might say Jake Fisher is better, but they're really playing it poor in terms of PFF grading system. And so, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know what's wrong with either one of their play, but ultimately what it comes down to is you have a team now that was planning on Oblihi and Fisher being ready by now, and instead you have a team that have a right tackle, has a 34-year-old left tackle who's probably going to be 35, I'm guessing, by next year. Keep in mind this season, a year before Whitworth's already, like, he's a year younger than Whitworth and has already kind of started to show signs of, hitting that tail end of his career now. But you have, I mean, Kevin Zeitler is still Kevin Zeitler's going to be a free agent, and you don't know if the Bengals are going to sign him. I think as of right now, and obviously we'll see what happens with Zeitler, but your goal is to keep Dalton upright because we've all seen that he's a better quarterback when Dalton's upright. You want your line to be able to block for running backs because Jeremy Hill's on your roster, and we all know that he's a better runner when he has a line that can create holes for him. He's not going to make something out of nothing like guys like Bernard and Rex Burkhead can do. So right now, I think, if I'm going to be honest, I think you have to re-sign Whitworth, and he has a lot of leverage, which is kind of scary because I remember last year he kind of seemed like he was trying to get as much money as he could for the 1 year deal. I think he got like $7 or so million, maybe nine, I can't remember, but it's something where luckily he's versatile and he's a team player and he's willing to do what the Bengals are going to ask him to do. He's been around for so long, and he's a guy that you want to be on the team because he's been here for so long and he's a mentor towards those players, and he's going to stand up when his teammate gets punched in the mouth. But it's just it's at the situation at best is not ideal. I'll say that, and hopefully Owihi is better at left tackle than he has been at right tackle because ultimately that seems like that's what the Bengals drafted him to be, was the left tackle. Otherwise, they probably would have taken Jake Fisher where they took Owihi, but I don't know. Maybe they took him and thought he would be a right tackle like Andre Smith. I mean, they took Andre Smith in the first round, so it's hard to make an assessment without knowing what the team is thinking. But I think right now you have to re-sign Whitworth, and especially with Eric Winston getting up there in age, you have the space on your roster. And I've heard from Matt Miller of Bleacher Report, I believe that he believes this year's offensive tackle class, or maybe it's just the offensive line class in general, is very weak. And so I think signing Whitworth and having him there as kind of an insurance, and he's probably going to start next year, to be honest. But having him there as an insurance policy,
I'm sure he wouldn't come back if he wasn't starting. Yeah,
yeah. So I think, I mean, and luckily, like I said, he's played guard. Bodine hasn't been bad, so I mean, he hasn't been great, but he's been average. So you can keep him there. You have Bowling, who probably could move to right guard if Zeitler were to leave. So you have a lot of pieces, and you could probably move a couple of them around. Obviously, Zeitler and Bowling haven't really been moving, so you're guessing they're going to be there. But Witt's a good backup guard, and he's a good tackle. Could probably start at either position, but we'll probably start at left tackle since that's the more dire need. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult position. I think they have to sign him just because they really don't have any leverage at this point. They can't just go out there with two unproven players at the tackle positions. That's kind of what it comes down to.
Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot, but it's also just kind of a quick little thing. I mean, number one, your thoughts on should the Bengals move to the future based on the shakiness they've seen from both Fisher and Abuehi? And number two, might the future be Abuehi left tackle, Fisher right tackle, and if they let Kevin Zeitler walk in free agency, maybe Whitworth's your starting right guard?
I think, like what Connor said, when they were drafted, I think the assumption was Obuehi would be your future left tackle, Fisher would be your future right tackle.
Right.
Whitworth has talked about in the past. I haven't heard it this year. In the past, he's talked about since he started at left guard, he went at mine when he got older, he couldn't play left tackle anymore, he'd be willing to play left guard. And as Connor kind of talked about his versatility, this reminds me a lot of the Terrence Newman thing, where the Bengals kept bringing Terrence Newman back. We had spent a first-round pick on Drake Kirkpatrick, first-round pick on Darqueze Dennard, and it kept them on the bench. And a lot of fans were like, why in the heck do we keep bringing this old man back when you have these young guys just sitting there? And it kind of reminds me of the whole thing now we're doing with tackles, which they have gone heavy with. Those 2 picks a couple years ago, their top 2 picks, and you bring Winston back, who is getting the playing time over Boyhe, and Whitworth back. That, yeah, you've got these young guys, but you're not playing them. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is you just have to play your best players. And I mean, the whole idea is you're trying to win. It doesn't matter if they're 38 or if they're 18. If your best player is the young guy, you play the young guy. If he's the old guy, you play the old guy, because you're playing to win, especially as short as the careers are of every coach not named Marvin Lewis. You have a very short shelf life where you need to get those wins. Although the one thing I will say where the Bengals are kind of in a different position with that is they generally aren't going to play the younger guy if he's better. Most other teams, the younger guy's better, he plays. The older guy's better, he plays. The Bengals tend to play the older guy if he's better or worse. I mean, you look at what they did with Dunlap sitting behind Gathers and so forth. And so the one argument I could see for letting Whitworth go is if they think Boyhe and Fisher, have this magic third year in them, kind of like they thought they would get with Bodine. If they think they see,
and they kind of haven't gotten it for what it's worth. He's improved. He hasn't been great, but he's taken steps.
And if they think that's going to be the case with the Boyhe or Fisher, the only way I think they're going to get on the field is if you let Whitworth go. Because I don't think if they outplayed Whitworth and Whitworth's on the roster, I don't think Whitworth's going to get benched. So if they think one of them is going to step up, that's kind of the only way he would make it. They'd make it on the field. I think most teams probably wouldn't do that. They'd say, hey, the young guy's better. We're playing him. We don't care. I don't see the Bengals doing that. So that'd be the only argument I could see for letting him go, is if you think one of those guys is going to have a breakout year, and it's the only way the Bengals would get him on the field.
Or if Zeitler walks in free agency, I think. That's another thing. I think it's kind of contingent on him staying.
Yeah.
If they're willing to put one of them at guard. They seem to be pretty well set with no, this guy's a center, he's going to play center. No, he's a whatever. They talk about versatility, but they don't seem to do it as much as I think the fans wish they would.
Well, and then if you look at – then you're talking about maybe one of these young guys playing guard. If you bring back Whitworth, he's going to be your left tackle. Most likely he will be your starting left tackle. Then you have Cedric Boyhe, or whichever, Cedric Boyhe, who has struggled – mightily as the right tackle. You either kick him into right guard, and then you have Jake Fisher to right tackle. You have both those guys right next to each other. I don't know how that would.
Although I could see someone like Boyhe at left guard. Well, I'd like to see Hopkins play guard, but
Bowling's there at left guard too.
Very athletic, but doesn't have the strength. Kind of reminds me of Robert Gallery, where he was drafted, I think, like a top 5 pick as a tackle, just struggled. They moved him to guard, and wow, this guy's really good now.
He's a Pro Bowl guard. Yep.
Yeah, so that might be what you have to do with someone like Boyhe. That, okay, we thought he had it in to be a left tackle. He just doesn't, but he's obviously athletic enough and seems to have enough ability that we just need to get him in a position that is a good fit.
Yeah. I'm going to be the master analyst again and just kind of say, I don't know the answer. Much like the last, I don't know what the best answer is, much like the last segment and what we're talking about with tanking or not tanking and what you do here. I mean, it's kind of like, you either take that leap of faith and say, we trust our draft picks, we trust what we've done, and these guys are our future. Or you look at 2016 as your sample size for many instances where the team did that, and it has not worked out. So I don't know what you do here. Selfishly, I think Andrew Whitworth is not only has been a great player for the Bengals, but he's also a great guy. I've met him in person. He is an amazing guy, super nice, super personable. I don't know exactly how a 6'7" guard would necessarily fit in. Usually, you got to be a little more square built than the tall, lanky kind. But he was very effective in 2013, as we know, when Clint Bowling got hurt, and he was effective for the Bengals there. His play has dipped this year, so I don't know.
For what it's worth, he's still been a really good player. He's been well above average, but he's up there in age. It's kind of scary.
Yep. So that's kind of, I think we all kind of say, well, I see it one way and I see it the other way too. I think that's
I don't think any of us really know the answer. I think,
right.
Like you said, AC, I think it's just really like all of these questions. It makes me really have like an understanding of how difficult it actually is to be the front office in this situation, especially because a lot of it's contingent on Zeitler returning. Which, are you going to overpay him? Are you going to not pay him? Are you going to? It's, oh my gosh, so many things.
Yeah, and then go ahead, Scott.
This is one of the beauties of the NFL having the salary cap, is you get to have this discussion because you look, the stadium right next to Paul Brown Stadium where the Reds play, where they don't have a salary cap, and you have to tank. I mean, you have a limited window where you can be good for this window, but unless you have unlimited funds, once that window's gone, you have to sell off. You have to get those high picks. You have to get those minor league guys. You have to build it back up and hope for another run, 4 or 5 years down the road. You get your little window where you can try to win. And you go, in the NFL, you don't have to do that. You can pretty much try to win every year. And that's one of the awesome things that lets us have this discussion. If we were discussing a Reds podcast, it would be, a no-brainer. Well, of course you have to tank because you have nothing to play for the next 2 years. And that's kind of one of the nice things about the NFL is you have that ability each year to be in it, unless you're just
like the Cowboys bounce back from 4-12.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out next year, and it's either the wave of the future or not. And I think it also depends on if Marvin Lewis stays, because I think if Marvin Lewis stays, I think he's going to do one of those rental contracts to Andrew Whitworth to get him to stay there, let those young guys develop a little more, which might not be a terrible idea based on what we've seen from particularly Oboihi this year. We'll see. We're gonna close up here, and we're gonna talk about the Cleveland game real quick. And I'm a little nervous about this one, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. I look at this, and obviously everything points to the Bengals winning this game. The Bengals are a superior team. They have a more seasoned head coach. Regardless of what your thoughts are of Lewis at this point, here's the things that scare me, Scott. I look at it. Cleveland's coming off. Not only is it in Cleveland, which is not fun, it's a rivalry game, which you never, and a division game, which you never know exactly how teams are going to play, no matter how bad they've been all year. They are a hungry team that has not had a win all year, and I think they're better than their record indicates. RG3 is coming back. And you've got a coach in Hugh Jackson, who is very familiar with the Bengals and what they like to do. Am I crazy for being scared about this game?
I'd say not exactly. It's definitely a game I think the Browns could win. Given that it is a home game, it's very hard for a team to go 0-16, especially as mentioned the salary cap, the era of free agency. Now the Browns obviously did make a big push to gut their team, get as many draft picks as they could. Kind of, if you were ever to argue a team was intentionally looking like they were tanking, the Browns offseason looked like it was maybe trying to do that to build those picks. That being said, I think it's a game they could, especially the Bengals-Browns game. I think we ended up winning pretty easily, but the first part of that game, it didn't look like we're going to run away with it like we should have been. Hey, we're a home team. We think we're going to be in the playoffs. This is a game we should win. We should win handily. And for a while, it did not look
and if you remember, it hinged on that A.J. Green Hail Mary right before the half.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. I'm going to disagree, though, and say the Bengals should win this. Should win it easily. And the reason I'm saying that is this is a team that's had 7 guys attempt to pass this year. Good. And it's a quarterback league. And, okay, you get RG3 back, you get Josh McCown. that's still RG3 and Josh McCown. It's
Right.
we're not talking great. And you look at and Marvin Lewis is really good at winning meaningless games. And we've talked about this before. His primetime record's horrible, playoff record's horrible. You get a 1:00 game on a Sunday that no one's watching, or you get a game that when they're out of their record when they're out of playoff contention is just amazingly good, or early in the season is really good. If they're in the playoff hunt and they're playing for a first round bye, they're horrible. This isn't that kind of game. So this is a game where, given Marvin Lewis's history, this is one that they should win, because the only thing a win does now is it gives Mike Brown a cheaper first round pick to sign next year. So that makes Mike Brown happy, because he'd much rather sign a number 12 pick than a number 4 pick. And Marvin Lewis is really good about giving those to him. So I think for those reasons, which are kind of superficial, silly reasons, I would say I think it's a game the Bengals should win.
Yeah, they definitely should win. Obviously, the talent disparity and all of the things Cleveland has gone through this season and off season is just kind of crazy. But Connor, I still look at RG3 in I believe the last time the Bengals faced RG3, granted it was in his breakout rookie year when he was with the Redskins in 2012. He ran all over him. He was running the read option. He threw the ball well. I mean, he was really good against the Bengals. There again, I don't know if I mentioned, with all the other stuff that seems to be going in Cleveland's corner, they are coming off of a bye. That's a little scary as well. And it's so, as Scott mentioned, it's so hard for a team to go winless in a year. Does this game scare you, Connor? Are you worried at all? Or is this just, hey, especially when you have Baltimore and Pittsburgh coming up down the pike as well, which are looking like must-win games for a potential playoff berth?
I mean, I if the Bengals lose to the Browns, I'll put a paper bag on my head. What about the Browns is better than the Eagles? I think if you go position by position, maybe only the running back and left tackle position is better. I mean, yeah, they have Hugh Jackson, and yeah, okay, how many times are we going to say now that they're a better team than record indicates? I mean, I'd say the Bengals are too, but the Browns have apparently looked good at times and still haven't won a single game. So what changes this week? I mean, I think the only way the Browns win is if Corey Coleman and Terrell Pryor both have huge games, which fortunately for the Bengals, the secondary has been playing very well as of late, and Vontaze Burfict has been an animal in the linebacking core. I mean, yeah, Kevin Hogan, I think, is a quarterback who ran for 100 yards against the Bengals, which is kind of insane. But I don't think RG3 is going to be that mobile quarterback. I don't think that's what Hugh Jackson wants him to be. I also think that he's coming off injury. I don't remember what type of injury it is, but I would assume he's probably not just going to be, especially coming off an injury in a career where every single time he's gotten hurt, he comes back and immediately gets hurt. I don't think he's going to put himself in a position where he's going to be able to get hit that many times. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I just do not see the Cleveland Browns having any chance of winning this game. I think it would be an embarrassing game for the Bengals fans and the team. I think if any Bengal fan legitimately wants the team to, tank, that's fine, whatever. But do you really want them to lose to the Browns in a year where the Browns are going to go winless? For the Bengals to be the only team the Browns can beat in a 1-15 season, I think that would be pathetic. I think it would be disgusting. The Bengals have to win this game. I think they will win this game. I think they should smoke the Browns. I don't know if they're going to smoke the Browns. I think it's a game where they're going to have a big game and come out with a victory.
Got a score prediction, Connor?
I don't know if I went bold last week against the Eagles. I'm pretty sure I did, but I'll go... let's say 28 to 9. I'll go 28 to 9.
28 to 9. Scott?
I'm going to predicate this based on Mike Nugent missing extra points. And I actually put that into my score last week, and I said he'd missed 2. He missed 1. So.
Yeah, you called that one. And also, not to cut you off, I do want to say, because it's a good segue with what you're talking about. There was someone in our YouTube chat that named themselves Nona You Business. And they said, my phone was buffering for a while. I hope I didn't miss anything on Nugent. I would love to hear some thoughts on him. So there's some thoughts for None of You Business. about
Vote
Mike
Nugent
Nugent.
for Pro Bowl. Vote
Yeah,
Nugent for Pro
there you
Bowl.
go. And Scott, you were a soothsayer with the extra point misses last
And
week.
I'll throw something out on Nugent for Mr. None of our business. After the first 4 weeks, we were praising the guy. He was 14 of 14 for extra points, 12 of 13 for field goals.
Yep.
Since week 4, he's missed 5 extra points. He's like 7 for 12, and he's missed 4 field goals. He actually has a lower extra point accuracy on the season than field goal accuracy.
That is insane. That is insane.
Both are bad. Both are like 80%. But yeah, it's ridiculous that the one is lower than the other. And yeah, since week 4, he's just been instead of kickalicious, he's been missalicious.
Yeah, and he looks like the preseason Nugent we saw.
And it kind of brings me to a point. I'm wondering. I don't know why we don't go for 2, because if we know we only have a 70% chance or whatever it is now of him hitting a extra point, and if you do the math and figure 70% of 1 point, is 0.7 or whatever. They say the rate of getting a 2-point conversion, from a yard or 2 out is 50%. So, you do the statistics. Okay, 50% of 2 is 1. So you're going to average 1 point if you do the 2-point conversion every time. You're going to average 0.7 points if you go for the extra point. Why not just go for the 2-point conversion? But that's for another time.
Yeah.
That's the kind of question I'd like them to ask Marvin Lewis in the interview.
I would
Not
love for the
silly
Cincinnati media
questions.
to actually ask him that question.
Well,
But
if you
it's
guys
not
can
gonna
give me a
happen.
press pass, I'll ask him that, because a lot of the questions they get are, "Oh, do you remember when Connor Barwin was a UC guy? Do you like him? Do you call Hugh Jackson at night?" It's just kind of silly. Anyway, I'm sorry, you were asking for a score, not for a rant. So I'm going to say we score, say 3 touchdowns and a field goal. We miss 1 extra point. I'm going to cut it to 1. I'll say he makes 2 or 3. He has a improved week. Ohio State made the playoffs, so he's a Ohio State guy, so I'll give him a little credit for that. So we'll say Bengals score 23, and I'll say the Browns score 10. They've averaged just under 10 points their last 4 weeks. Their non-existent offense has become less existent, so I'm going to say 23-10, Bengals.
Okay.
I think 9 was a bit much for me because that was assuming they were going to score 3 times, which is, I don't know why I thought that.
Or maybe twice if they miss an extra point, like Nugent is prone to do. So,
And they turned a 2-point conversion in like that Chiefs game last week.
They have, yeah.
This one for me either reeks of upset, like I mentioned, because of all of the factors that are going into Cleveland's corner, or it looks exactly like the blowouts we've seen over the past, not really so much this year, but 2015 and 24 when Manziel took the field. And I mean, the Browns were an absolute mess in those games. And I don't know. I guess I'm going to meet in the middle, and I'm going to give an exact, I believe it's the exact same score as what the Bengals won by the first time around this season, and say 31-17 Bengals. I would, and I hate to say this because I guess I've watched this team too long and seen way too many Bengals games, but it would not be surprising to me if Hugh Jackson gets his first win as the Browns head coach against the Bengals. I don't want it to happen.
No.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I don't want it to happen. I do not want it to happen. But it would not be surprising based on all of these factors and things that I don't know. Maybe I'm just way too cynical and way too superstitious.
No, you're not.
But,
it's. I think it's a feeling buried inside every. 2014, is that the year? Was it 2013 with that TNF game Thursday night? Was
man.
I
that was 2014.
I can't. How does no Bengal fan remember the feeling of that game when they're saying they want the Bengals to lose to the Browns? You don't want them to lose that game.
No.
But if they lose this game, they're going to win the next 3,
right?
Because
they'll be out of playoff contention. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the Marvin Lewis way. We love it. One more final thought for none of you business in our YouTube chat. The one thing that really struck me, which I found hilarious this last Sunday, was that with all of the great plays the Bengals made and coming out victorious, the loudest cheers you heard on Sunday were somewhat mockingly when Nugent actually put stuff through the uprights, be it extra points or field goals, and I found that to be quite funny. That I felt bad for the guy. Don't get me wrong, felt bad for the guy, but he's kind of deserving of it based on some of the big kicks he's missed this year and some of the last. So on one hand, pat on the back, Bengals fans that were in attendance, and on the other hand, shame on you, Bengals fans that were in attendance, because
I assume thinking one in would be a huge.
It's on. He's been unreal this year. So those are some final thoughts about Nugent. We also had, I just wanted to credit one of our listeners who gave us a fan question when we talked about the tanking, not tanking thing too. I think that was one of the questions we received, as well as a segment we wanted to do. Anyways, we're going to get out of here. We all think the Bengals will win. Let's hope my superstitions do not get the best of everybody, and let's hope the Bengals take it to their former assistant coach in Cleveland, and Hue Jackson, even though he's a great guy. Guys, thanks for joining me. It's been a great show. Look forward to next week, and let's get a win and maybe make a little playoff push here, huh? Who dey?
Vote Nugent for Pro Bowl. Also, hope he joins Brandon Tate, who's in top 5 Pro Bowl voting for return specialists.
Good Lord. Who are you? Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh. All right, let's get out. On that note, we got to get out of here. Good Lord. Thanks for listening. Check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, Twitter, all of the things that I've mentioned throughout the show. Also on Cincy Jungle, we have a number of different posts we'll have on this show, and as well as a lot of different content we throw up there. So appreciate you listening. Appreciate the support. Do not vote for those special teams players Connor mentioned just a second ago. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.